Welcome to the second part of the discussion on um, variance analysis. So we ended on the question, and I will park the answer at the latter portion of the discussion kung papaano sino ang accountable on the changes in the exchange rates as taken as an example in this focus company Deere and Company. So later natin sagutin yung about dyan sa question na yan. Okay, we refer to direct labor cost variances na ang indicator niyan ay yung rate and time variances. This is essentially the same as that of a material quantity variance. Same lang din ang concept niyan paggamit ng standard and actual rate. Okay? Okay, you can use the example check up corner 9-1 to have an exercise on how the direct material a review, actually a review, not an exercise of how the direct material price, quantity, labor time, labor rate variance are computed. So this will be your guide, yung check up corner 9-1. The factory overhead variances, let's look at this. Okay, the factory overhead flexible budget. So we look at this. The preparation of a flexible budget was described and illustrated in chapter 8, di ba? The discussion on flexible budget kung saan when the changes in the activity levels, when there are changes in the activity levels, there are also changes on the variable costs in that particular activity level. So yun yung ini-illustrate lang po dito. Kasi the factory overhead has components of variable and fixed costs. So yung components ng variable cost, yan yung nag-change dito sa ating flexible budget. But the fixed cost will remain across whether there are high or low activity levels. Okay, please refer to this tabulation para makita mo yung effect doon sa variable costing natin as the capacity or of the operations changes. Okay, the fixed factory overhead volume variance, the variable factory overhead controllable variance as discussed here. So how are we going to report cases of overhead variances? So yan ang titingnan po natin. Okay, tingnan mo itong exhibit 9, the graph of fixed overhead volume variance. So itong line, yung horizontal line na ito is the budgeted fixed cost na hindi nagbabago whether kahit na pa tumataas yung direct labor hours as our activity level. Okay? The standard fixed overhead, okay, this is said to be 2.4 per hour. So kung tingnan mo yung legends related to the variances, itong yellow mark, this is an unfavorable volume variance. Unfavorable volume variance because mas mataas yung actual compared to the standard. Okay? At dito lang siya nag-generate under the violet ng favorable volume variance kasi ay mas maliit na yung actual versus doon sa kanyang standard cost. Okay. So how do we report the factory overhead cost variance? So we look at this. We compare, we have a column for the actual cost, we have a column for our budget, and then we identify the variances. So yung mga naka-negative amounts, that is referred to as the favorable variances. So ipapakita lang din natin yung net effect nun. Diba? So therefore, the total factory overhead cost variance is favorable at 1,600. So anong gagawin ngayon ng top management dito? Ang titingnan niya dito are not the fixed overhead cost but the variable overhead cost at kung sino ang responsible on that particular items. For example, the factory wages, the indirect materials, the factory supervisor are responsible for these items. And normally, yung mga factory supervisor, meron pang employees under dyan. For example, those who are responsible in material requisition for the factory and those who are responsible as uh, supervisor related, yung human resource related to the factory personnel, sila ang responsible dyan. So, kailangan ma-identify, for example, negative ang wages, ang unfavorable ang variances ng wages, indirect materials. So, tinitingnan natin, pinipinpoint natin yung responsibility doon sa mga uh, personnel who are in control, 'di ba? The key issue ay yung controllability. So tinitingnan natin yung controllability nun. So as management accountant, it is the responsibility to make a recommendation related to how the variances, especially those unfavorable variances, can be cured or can be corrected in the future reporting. Okay? Okay, we look at this, the Exhibit 11, the factory overhead variances. Kasi dapat, as management accountant, pag nakita mo pa lang yung variances, alam mo na kung paano mo siya i-report. Look at this. Okay, the T account for the factory overhead, actual, and then the applied factory overhead. Nanggaling, bago yan makarating dyan, ay nanggaling yan on several items. The actual factory overhead is coming from your financial statements. Okay? Kasi kung magkano yung nagastos mo do on the journal na naka-record sa iyong general journals at ni-record na rin sa iyong ledger, yun naman ang ire-reflect mo na actual overhead cost. The applied factory overhead will depend on the policy of the company on how we apply factory overhead. Sometimes nagsiset yan ng percentage, nagsiset yan ng decimal rate. For example, 0.5 for every uh, 100 labor hours, mga tipong ganon. So it will depend on the company policy, it will depend on the problem na nakakarap sa iyo kung paano daw ina-apply yung factory overhead na yan. Okay? Let's proceed more. Okay, checkup corner number 9-2 will guide you on how to compute for your factory overhead variances, specifically controllable volume and the total cost. Okay. As I said, we will not deal more of how it is computed. We will just review how some items are computed, but we focus more on how we report these variances. Okay, recording and reporting variances from standards. Standard costs may be used as a management tool to control costs separately from the accounts in the ledger. However, many companies include standard costs in their accounts. One method for doing so records standards costs and variances at the same time the actual product costs are recorded. So some companies record the standard costs and variances para madaling makita. Kumbaga pag tinotal mo yung T account ng uh, standard cost at uh, mako-compare mo kaagad dun sa actual at ma-generate agad natin yung variance on a particular item. For example, material, labor, or overhead variances. Just look at this example. Debit materials, debit direct material price variance. So, naka-indicate kaagad yung variance and credit accounts payable. Same is true with this, debit work in process, credit direct material quantity variance, and credit materials. But sometimes, this tends to be confusing kasi naka-generate agad yung variance mo dyan. Mas sanay kasi the traditional accountants, mas sanay yung ina-analyze ang variances on a separate sheet rather than journalizing immediately the variances. So, it will depend on the company policy, it will depend on the accountant, but in practice, hindi masyadong gino-journalize kaagad yung variances. So these are special scenarios that is included as an illustration kasi on some, especially on yung mga specialized industries, manufacturing, yung mga big manufacturing companies, they tend to use the direct recording of variances. Kasi sometimes naka-ano yan eh, naka-automate, how do I say it? automated ang generation ng entry for variances. So kaya diretso na nakukuha na set upan natin ng amount yung variances, but under yung talagang traditional journalizing of transactions, kailangan mo munang computein yung variance bago mo yan i-journalize diyan. But on some companies that use automated systems, ay madali nilang nako-compute agad yung variance on a particular, halimbawa kakabili pa lang, computed agad yung price variance. Kaka-issue pa lang sa production, computed agad yung quantity variance. So because of the automated systems used by um, some companies. Okay, let's take a look at the income statement prepared by Western Rider as we look at, kasi ginagamit ito kapag magre-report ka sa top management. So meron tayong sales dyan. The cost of goods sold is at standard. The gross profit is at standard. So pine-prepare natin yung concept for variances from standard. So ina-itemize natin yung unfavorable at favorable to reflect yung net variance at yung gross profit natin dito. Okay? So ganyan po ang presentation when we provide for variances. Kapag variance analysis, gusto makita ng management kung nasang items ba nagkaroon ng favorable or unfavorable variance. Ililift mo lang naman po yung na-compute mo na variance sa price, quantity, labor, and labor time. Kapag controllable naman, ayan din. Okay. Okay. Let's look at the answer on the pending question na yung nagpi-pinpoint ng responsibility as my final talking point for this discussion. 'Di ba ang question doon ay ipipinpoint ba natin yung responsibility kay Brazilian purchasing agent na bumili siya when the amount of money, yung Brazilian real, ay at its low point. Yun ay effect ng foreign currency exchange rates, yung fluctuations in the foreign currency. So this is the answer. Although purchasing agents may be able to control the timing when they make purchases. Kasi 'di ba, the purchasing agents are responsible for their purchases. Kung kailan nila bibilin, it is their responsibility. Yung control, kung kailan nila bibilin yung items. However, they cannot control changes in exchange rates. Thus, it would not be appropriate to hold the purchasing agent accountable for unfavorable change in the exchange rate. So remember, the key issue is controllability. Meron ba siyang control on the changes in the exchange rate? Wala. So therefore, hindi appropriate na ipinpoint mo yung accountability dahil na gumastos siya ng malaki because of the changes in the foreign exchange rate. Note that the exchange rate fluctuations are normally included within the direct material price variance. Thus, the multinational companies like Deere should carefully investigate direct material price variance to isolate the effects of foreign currency fluctuations. So when we analyze direct material price variance, we normally isolate or we segregate effects of foreign currency fluctuations because these are not measures of the performance of a uh, purchasing officer or purchasing agent. So doon mo siya tingnan sa mga items na may control lang siya. For example, given halimbawa may additional information na given na dapat binilin ngayon on this period na ready na lahat ng documents, pero naging negligent siya at binili niya yon on the succeeding month because of a negligible reason, yun pwede nating i-pinpoint yung responsibility sa kanya. But when ginawa naman niya yung proper documentation at binili niya, pinlace niya yung order at nagkaroon pa rin ng fluctuation on the currency, we cannot pinpoint responsibility, and the Brazilian purchasing agent cannot be held accountable for this kasi nga yun ay uncontrollable situations, especially kapag related sa foreign currency fluctuations. So I think that would end the discussion. So I want you to take away uh, the logic under the variance analysis. Ano ang responsibility ng management accountant? The reporting of the variances, whether favorable or unfavorable, and looking at how the variance, the financial statements indicating the variances can be interpreted to top management. Kung paano natin siya i-explain, kung paano tayo magbibigay ng recommendation to improve yung mga unfavorable variances na nakita natin, to pinpoint responsibility and accountability to those who are in control of that particular variance. So that ends the discussion for variance analysis under the eye of a strategic manager, under the eye of a management accountant reporting to top management. Thank you.